Another beautiful summer Sunday here in Hawaii, and it's time for our public access programming on our 5H Hawaii media stations on Oahu and 5H Hawaii media stations on Kauai. Johnny Miro, thanks for tuning in Sundays from 9 a.m., covering some important local topics, and today an interesting one, still very relevant, and it's relating to zoning restrictions for apiaries and beekeeping. It's Bill 144. And I'll be discussing that with a member of the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, Jonathan Helton, once again. Jonathan, thanks for joining me. A very unique topic, not something on top of mind of many, but it must be of importance. You're the policy researcher at the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Thanks for joining me this Sunday.
Yeah, thank you for having me this morning. It's good to be here, and yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting conversation.
So the topic will be bees in Hawaii, and you hear about this from time to time about the population dwindling down and the importance of that and the importance of bees in society. Zoning reform is causing a buzz across the state, and how this might be affecting the business of beekeeping. Yeah, both Honolulu and Hawaii counties are looking at changing up the regulations on beekeeping. Strangely, they're going in opposite directions. Why is that? Well, Jonathan Helton has hopefully the answers to that. So, Jonathan, how exactly are zoning laws and beekeeping connected to each other?
Typically, when we think about zoning law, at least at the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, we think about it in terms of housing. Because zoning law is pretty simple. It regulates what you can build and where. And so with a lot of our work on housing, we've done a lot of research in how zoning laws affect housing. But just recently, in the past month, there's been an effort on the Big Island to reform how beekeeping is allowed under their zoning code. And there's also been an effort for probably the past 2 years in Honolulu to rewrite the entire zoning code. And that would affect beekeeping as well. But those counties they're going in opposite directions in how they're trying to say where you can have beehives and what sort of requirements you have to meet if you want to have them. So I'm sure we'll get into the specifics of what each county is doing.
Listeners are probably going, why are we talking about beekeeping, right? How important is beekeeping in Hawaii, Jonathan?
It's actually really important. And this was a really interesting fact to me. My dad used to keep bees long time ago. But so there's some statistics that I learned from the Big Island Beekeepers Association. And so I'll throw them out there. So if listeners are familiar, on the mainland, you're right, Johnny, the bees consistently, there's a very large percentage of bees that die each year. And so the bee population has consistently gone down over time. It's actually a pretty big issue because so much of the fruit that the United States produces needs to be pollinated by bees. It's not pollinated by wild bees anymore. Instead, a lot of fruit trees are pollinated by people who will take beehives and they will put them in a grove of trees for maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. And then when the pollination season for those trees are done, they will take the beehives elsewhere and they'll pollinate other trees. So beekeeping is really, really necessary to keep fruit growing. And Hawaii actually plays an outsized role in making sure that the United States is able to grow fruit. So this was astounding to me, but Hawaii County alone provides about a third of the queen bees that are sold to the mainland each year. So each hive of bees has a queen bee, and the queen bee is very important to keep the hives going. And so Hawaii County alone supplies a third of the queen bees to the mainland and 75% of queen bees to Canada, more or less each year. So Hawaii County, in a lot of ways, is keeping all of the fruit trees on the mainland pollinated. So that's major. The Beekeepers Association, they're told that in a presentation, they said about 600,000 queens are exported from the Big Island every year. It's a $20 million industry.
Wow.
So this is actually really important.
What part of Hawaii Island are the beehives located? And where do they do most of the beekeeping?
The Department of Agriculture used to track that up until a couple of years ago. And so the Beekeepers Association said with the most recent statistics, which are, they're like 5 years old, but At the time, it was mostly South Kona and maybe the Kau regions. And so definitely the southern parts of the Big Island are where they were a couple of years ago. So I'm not sure now.
So we're talking about a specific bill, and is this the bill 144, correct? Is this the specific bill?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. There's that bill being considered, it's 144, Jonathan, by the Hawaii County Council that would change zoning between the beehives and the apiaries. So what exactly would this bill do?
So Bill 144, it was introduced, I believe it was either last month or the month before, and it makes three important changes. So number one, right now, beekeeping on Hawaii Island is regulated the same way that a commercial feedlot or commercial pig raising facility might be. So it's regulated the same way that like heavy agriculture is regulated. And what that requires, that means two things. That means that anyone who wants to set up beehives on Hawaii Island has to be on agriculture zoned land. And they have to get permission from the State Department of Health. So right there, that's a pretty big limitation. Mm-hmm. Only ag lands. Now, of course, a lot of the Big Island is ag, but you've immediately blocked out any of the urban or suburban areas that they're not zoned ag. You might not be able to beekeep. So that's the first thing that it would change. It would get rid of that requirement. The second thing it would do is it would make beekeeping an allowable use in all zones. So that's pretty simple. If you have a residential parcel, maybe you've got a single family home, you've got a backyard, you want to keep bees, under the bill, you'll be able to do so. And the bill does set forward some general practices on, good beekeeping practices, and that's I think going to be collaborative with the Beekeepers Association and the county government to make sure that people who want to keep bees know what they're doing. And then the third thing that the bill does, and there's a funny story here. So right now, the county code says, anytime you want to have those beehives, only in the agricultural districts, they have to be at least 1,000 feet away from either a road or another zoning district. Mm. So there was actually a story that one of the beekeepers shared with us. There was someone, I believe he was in Kona, whose beehives were 980 feet away from the road. And I guess someone complained or something. And so they made him move his beehives because they weren't 1,000 feet away from the road. So the bill gets rid of that as well. It says, okay, instead of 1,000 feet, you can have them 25 feet from property lines. So, that's a lot that it does, but put simply, it really deregulates beekeeping. And with how big the industry already is on Hawaii Island, now you're expanding where people can keep one or two hives, or if they want to go big and really start breeding queens and producing honey to sell commercially, they're going to be able to do that under this bill.
What I'm thinking for the non-ag areas, say urban, but not exactly Hawaii Island as far as urban is concerned, is that what the apiary is? It's kind of like you'd have to have like a green room to have the bees because, neighbors close by would kind of get a little bit worried that all of a sudden these bees are going to flock into their area, their home, what have you. So how would they go about making sure that wouldn't happen? Is that what these apiaries are?
That's a legitimate question. So there's a couple of things you could do. Some people have mentioned that there might be places in Hilo that would be appropriate for maybe even rooftop gardens, and then you could put a hive up there that would pollinate the gardens. It wouldn't really be wouldn't be as intrusive. And the second thing is the bill does set forward some general management practices, and it says, hey, if there's complaints, those complaints can be made to the State Department of Health. There have been stories of when someone hasn't maybe been taking care of their bees super well, and so they'll go swarm over into a neighbor's yard, and that's something that needs to be addressed on a case by case basis. And I think that people will have the understanding to be able to do that. Okay,
so where currently does Bill 144 stand, Jonathan, and who's for it, and I guess who's against it?
So I believe it was last week, the Leeward Planning Commission on Hawaii Island gave that bill a favorable recommendation. So that's good. And the Windward Planning Commission, so the other planning commission on the island, that hears the bill tomorrow, July 1st, and hopefully they'll give it a positive recommendation as well. If once it is heard by both of the planning commissions, as with any zoning bill, it will then go back to the county council, and they'll debate it. They might make some amendments to it based on the feedbacks they get, and then hopefully they'll look at passing it later this year, and so we can really see beekeeping get a boost. And of course, the people who are for that are the Beekeepers Association. There's lots of people who've written in letters who are either beekeepers themselves, or they're people who want to be beekeepers but can't because of the rules. And then you have a lot of people who are concerned about local agriculture, who see, if we have more beekeepers, that's more pollination, and that's a plus to anyone who's got fruit trees or is wanting to do a pretty big vegetable garden. So there's a lot of people who are behind this, and of course some people are concerned. What if bees swarm into the yard? And who's going to take care of that? And as I said, the bill lays out some management practices for how that would be handled.
Grassroot Institute of Hawaii policy researcher Jonathan Hilton, and we're talking about zoning restrictions for apiaries and beekeeping, and it's Bill 144 specifically we were talking about, but I guess there's one in Honolulu There's also a bill that would change how beehives are regulated over here, right? That's
correct. So Honolulu is kind of going the opposite direction. So Hawaii County is going from really, really strict regulations to pretty loose regulations, and Honolulu is looking at going the opposite way. So right now, if you want to keep bees on Oahu, it's pretty simple. The city just asks that if you're not in an agricultural zone, so maybe you want to keep bees in your backyard, you can have up to 8 hives, and you need to keep them at least 25 feet away from a property line, unless you've got some sort of big fence. So those standards are pretty straightforward. If you want to do bees in agriculture land in Oahu, there's not really any sort of strict rules in place. But that might change. So Honolulu is in the process of debating Bill 64. And Bill 64 is an attempt to more or less rewrite the whole county zoning code. So it touches on everything from housing to radio antennas to businesses to agriculture. And one of the things that the bill has, at least in the most recent draft, is it would impose a lot of new restrictions on beekeeping. So I'll give you one that would really be a problem for anyone who's trying to keep bees anywhere in the urban areas or even the suburbs. So the Bill 64 would put in place a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size. So if you've got a house and it's on a piece of land that's smaller than 5,000 square feet, you'd no longer be able to keep bees. And if your lot is smaller than 10,000 square feet, you could only keep 2 beehives on that lot. And so it has a couple of other restrictions in place like this, where it's really limiting the number of hives per lot. Now it's 8 right now. Under the bill, it would go to 6 at the maximum, and that's for larger lots. So people who are beekeepers are kind of concerned about this, because they're wondering, is the city going to take away my ability to keep bees? Maybe I've got a house and it's got a fairly large lot, but I'm in a residential neighborhood. Under the bill, you might not be able to keep bees.
So is this the Oahu Beekeepers Association? Is that the current name of the people that do have beehives?
Yes, I'm not sure if there's an Oahu Beekeepers Association. Okay. Although I've spoken to some individual beekeepers about this. I don't know if they have an organized group or not.
Okay, what's the reasoning behind this change? Were there issues? I mean, it sounds like a lot of complaints came forward. Maybe one, and it's a very loud complaint.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to ask as well. So at the moment, I'm not sure. I've reached out to the State Department of Health to ask if anybody has been complaining about, bees are swarming in my yard. Maybe someone got stung or their pet got stung. And they haven't gotten back with me about any sort of complaints for Hawaii Island or Honolulu.
Mm-hmm.
So if people are complaining, I'm not sure yet. So I'm definitely looking into that, and hopefully we can get the data if there is any, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So it's Bill 64, right? And when's that going to be heard next?
Yeah, so Bill 64 is, right now they're debating it at council. They've been debating it, I believe, since last year. This is a multi-year process. And right now, we don't know when the agricultural part of Bill 64 is going to be heard. So they're hearing it in parts. So they've already heard the changes they want to make to residential zoning and commercial zoning. I think right now they're working on some of the public zoning. And they allegedly they're going to look at changes to agriculture zoning. But right now, they haven't posted a schedule as to when that might happen. If it happens, it'll probably be in the next 2 or 3 months. And we're certainly paying attention because, it touches a whole lot more than beekeeping. And there's a lot of concerns, both pro and con, on a lot of things the bill does. But this thing has come to our minds lately because of the contrasting things that Hawaii County and Honolulu are doing. It's directly opposite, for sure.
And of course, the other neighbor islands, you've got Maui and Kauai. How do they regulate the beehives, Maui and Kauai? And what about, say, some mainland cities?
Yeah, so I haven't looked into Maui and Kauai as much yet, but I can tell you that San Francisco, for example, right, that's a major city. They don't have lot size restrictions like what Honolulu is trying to put in place. So, they recognize that beekeeping is really important, even in an urban area. Chicago, another pretty large city, they allow up to 5 hives per residential lot. So not as many as Honolulu, but they definitely recognize that, hey, that this is important. We want to allow this in our city. So I'm going to look more into Kauai and Maui, but that's what I know about some of the larger mainland cities.
Okay. Jonathan Elton, policy researcher with Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. So what's your folks' take on these two bills, Jonathan, at Grassroots?
We really like the approach that Bill 144 is taking on the Big Island. We think that there's been a lot of talk about promoting local agriculture, and the state, sometimes the state will put some money toward helping farmers with grants or with research. And we think, okay, that's important. But one really important thing that state and county lawmakers can do is they can also try to identify regulatory barriers to local agriculture. And I think that the beekeepers on Hawaii Island, they've really found one right here. And so by changing this regulatory barrier, they're not getting rid of all regulation, but by really changing it, you're going to see a boom in beekeeping there, and that's going to benefit the industry. And because of how important beekeeping is on Hawaii Island, that could really benefit the rest of the world too. And so we kind of have the opposite take on Bill 64, or at least what it's doing with beekeeping, because you have people who are already keeping hives, and maybe they're just doing it as a hobby. Maybe they're making honey and selling it at the farmer's market. Maybe they're using their hives to pollinate a grove of fruit trees. And suddenly this bill comes in, and it's not going to affect everybody, but it could be taking away their ability to beekeep. And that's kind of the opposite direction of where we want to go, I think, as a state. We want to support more of our local, hobbyist and commercial beekeepers and our farmers. We don't want to harm them.
Yeah. So let's tie in the pollinators that I guess you said a third we supply to mainland areas from Hawaii Island, and then the honey. We didn't even touch on that. You just mentioned it again. So how big of an industry is this here locally, and how important is it again?
Oh, so on the Big Island, I know the Beekeepers Association there told me it was between $10 and $20 million of an industry there. I'm not sure how big it is on Oahu. As I said, the most recent data, the Big Island does have, about half of the islands, or half of the state's beekeepers, and has, I think it's close to 80% of the hives So a lot of the beekeeping is concentrated there, for sure.
And then when they do bring them over to the mainland because of the invasive species, possibility, how difficult is that task, and what do they have to go through? Do you know in your research?
I'm not familiar with the details, but I do know that there are some export controls from I believe it's the Federal Department of Agriculture. So if you're either trying to sell bees internationally, and I'm pretty sure if you're trying to sell bees within the United States, there's going to be some checks in place to make sure that, okay, your bees don't have some sort of disease that might get spread to other hives where you're sending them. And I definitely need to look more into the specifics of those regulations.
Well, I love my locally produced honey, so let's make sure we get these bills right here. Jonathan, anything else you'd like to add?
I think that's about it. We're looking forward to what's going to happen with Bill 144, and of course, we're watching Bill 64 too.
All right, that's Jonathan Helton, policy researcher at Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. You can let the folks know how to get a hold of you as far as information at your great website.
Of course, that's Grassroots, no S, institute.org. We've got a lot of information about housing and tax policy and healthcare, and right now I'm learning a lot about bees, so maybe expect to see a little bit of information about bees in the coming weeks and months.
Very interesting discussion, and thanks for once again filling us in with this important information. Maybe they didn't think so, but now they realize how important apiaries and beekeeping is here in the state of Hawaii, with more, I guess, coming in the near future. Jonathan Helton, policy researcher with Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thanks for once again stopping by.
Thank you. You too.